Welcome back to the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andy Temte. On the Balancing Act, we talk to business leaders and industry experts to explore the balancing acts we play in our professional lives and learn about the events that put rocket boosters behind their career success. Today, we have Ryan Craig joining us. Ryan is Managing Director at Achieve Partners, an education-focused private equity firm based in New York City. Ryan is also the author of several books, Apprentice Nation, you may have heard of, how the earn and learn alternative to higher education will create a stronger and fairer America. He's also the author of A New You, Faster and Cheaper Alternatives to College, as well as College Disrupted. He has a weekly newsletter called The Gap Letter, which I really urge all of our listeners to subscribe to. You can find it out on LinkedIn and also at the Achieve Partners website. Today, we're going to focus on education and alternative pathways into the world of work. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Thank you for having me, Andrew. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Great to be here with you.
Excellent. Well, before we get started, I ask all my guests this question. What's the elevator pitch version of your story?
Oh, wow. I guess what I would say is that I try and take a big picture approach to social challenges. And where I see one that where I feel like there hasn't been a market solution to the problem, I try and create one. And I've kind of done that consistently over the course of my career, from the very early days of online education through to when I founded the first pediatric obesity boarding schools and summer camps to deal with that epidemic, to now where we're trying to close the talent gap in the economy and create new pathways to socioeconomic mobility. I would say of all the challenges I've dealt with, this is probably the most important one. I think it's the reason the Democrats just lost the election, and we need to do better. And if we can, it's going to help bring the country together.
Yeah. Absolutely. It is. I'm teaching at my alma mater and local university again, kind of post my Kaplan career. Yeah. And we absolutely need alternative pathways into the world of work. So many in our population are being left behind by this historical notion that somehow the only path in was through a 4-year degree. So we're going to focus there. But before we get there, what's one event in your life that was a key accelerant for your career?
Oh gosh, probably the single biggest one was 2009, when I'd been instrumental to the creation of what was then the fastest growing online university. Company was Bridgepoint Education. University was Ashford. That company had just IPO'd. So that was my first IPO that I'd been a part of. And I got a call from a recruiter who was putting together an advisory board for the big German multinational media company Bertelsmann, as Bertelsmann was looking to follow in the path of Pearson and News Corp and become the latest sort of media company to enter the education market. So I joined their advisory board, and that led to a long, productive relationship that helped me create my first fund, because Bertelsmann became the anchor investor in that. And let me just say that for Bertelsmann's benefit, it was smart they put that board together. It helped them avoid many of the mistakes that their confreres, media companies made in entering the education market, and they've done quite well with it. So pleased to have been able to help them, and they certainly helped me get my start.
Yeah, when during my time at Kaplan, I also had a few interactions with the folks at Bertelsmann, and I'm also a musician. And when I was a very young man, I wanted to be a rock star. So all the while I'm talking to them, I'm also thinking, "Gosh, can you take my music over to the BMG side of the
That's right.
equation?"
That's right. No, they have, it's television and publishing and music, and they're kind of everywhere. And now they're also, they have a thriving education arm as well.
Yeah. So, Ryan, I'm curious, where we're talking about alternative pathways into the world of work, where did your passion for identifying and nurturing alternative pathways originate? What was the aha moment that you experienced?
Well, I would say it was the passion is more a passion for solving social challenges.
Sure.
It was a frustration that I had because in our early days as a firm, we made a number of investments in companies that were operating short-term training programs, boot camp type programs, and we weren't seeing the employment outcomes or the scale that we had expected. And so I got it into my head that maybe we were thinking about it backwards, and rather than putting the training cart first, why don't we put the employment cart or the employment horse before the training cart, and think about it in that way? And so I began thinking about and talking publicly about, well, what if a staffing company could build the training boot camp component into their business, so they could essentially become a place this trained talent. And I was giving a talk at a conference in Portland, Oregon, before an audience of a couple hundred college and university presidents and provosts. And it just so happened that in the audience was a gentleman from a staffing firm who was there exhibiting to colleges and universities, who heard me and came up to me afterwards and said, "That's exactly what I want to do." And it was truly like a chocolate in your peanut butter moment, because he had the staffing firm and I had the sort of education training background, and we invested in that company, which became Reviture, and it was just a phenomenal success. And that led to renaming our firm Achieve Partners. And it led to what we now know as our workforce strategy.
Oh, that's a wonderful story. I'd like to dig now into the why. There are listeners like my former self, my younger self, my kind of young dad persona with two young children, had this narrative that you got to go to college to have a rewarding career. So my kids, damn it, they're going to go to college. Let's suppose for our listeners who are holding on to that narrative that college is the primary path to a rewarding career, what's your message to help them see the need to develop viable alternatives, or what you're calling, the traditional learn to work versus work to learn?
Right. Well, I think, I came up with a framework that I had in the back of my book from 5 years ago, A New You, that I think is still valid, which is if you look at the data, it's pretty clear that if you can attend a selective 4-year university and you can afford to do so, and the odds are pretty good that you can, because those tend to be the ones that are most generous with their financial aid. Then that is almost certainly the best alternative for a young person, because they're not having to make a decision as to what vocation or what career they want to pursue. They'll get the benefit of that institution, the 4 years, the network, and all that, and they're going to come out without too much and perhaps no debt at all, depending on the financial aid package. So that's the best of all worlds. Unfortunately, if you if you sort of map the universe of undergraduate students in the U.S., that is probably less than 10% of the population is attending one of those institutions. The other 90% are in the other four quadrants, which is you're attending you're not getting the outcomes that you're getting at those highly selective institutions. You're attending a non-selective institution, and it's affordable for you, perhaps, but you're not getting those outcomes. Or you're attending a selective institution. It's not affordable, or it's non-selective and not non-affordable, which is kind of where the majority of students find themselves. And the outcomes that you see in those three other quadrants are poor in terms of completion rates, in terms of employability. So you have to ask yourself, be honest with yourself and your family. And if it's a non-selective university and it's not affordable, and there's, I have in my book sort of the definition of what is affordable, and you'd be surprised how stringent that definition is. And it's from the Lumina Foundation. But if you're truly in that bucket, then it probably behooves you to aggressively look at alternative pathways to a four-year degree, and not get hoodwinked by the idea that a degree is a degree is a degree. It's not. It depends where you attend. It depends even more what you major in, right? So if you're looking to major in engineering or computer science, and you're attending a non-selective university, that is a better bet. Not a sure thing, but a better bet than majoring in a non-STEM major at one of those universities. So those are the variables to think about as you're making that decision.
Yeah, and we're going to spend time later in the show kind of teasing apart what are those other opportunities. Ryan, we're going to take a really quick commercial break, and we'll be right back to really dive into the apprenticeship side of things. Hey, it's Andy here. I've got a new podcast I'd like to introduce you to, The Saturday Morning Muse. Start your weekend with me by exploring topics that span leadership, business management, education, and other musings that are designed to support your journey of personal and professional continuous improvement. Subscribe today on your favorite podcast platform. And we're back with Ryan Craig talking about alternative pathways into the world of work. Let's focus on apprenticeships. Our listeners are likely familiar with traditional apprenticeships in the trades like plumbing, electrical, etc. But what are some insights into experiments that you're seeing around the country to expand apprenticeships into other industries? What's working from your perspective?
What's working? My book is basically a litany of what's not working.
Great.
But there are some examples out there. But I think what's important to understand is that apprenticeships are not first and foremost training programs. They're jobs, meaning that unless there's a willing employer willing to hire and pay a worker who, by definition, is not going to be productive for a period of time, there ain't no apprenticeship. So that is important. It's different it's a different species than workforce development training programs because they're jobs, and that's why almost every other developed country funds apprenticeship separately and differently from the way it funds workforce development and training, because they are jobs that require an employer. So what I was saying earlier about intermediaries, the reason intermediaries are important is that nowhere where apprenticeships thrive globally, whether in Germany, Austria, or Switzerland, or in the U.S. building trades, Do they thrive because employers in those sectors are more farsighted or more benevolent about being willing to employ an unproductive worker for a period of time? No. They thrive because there are intermediaries who are doing the work of setting up and running these programs and doing the heavy lifting, in many cases, of employing these unproductive workers until they become productive. So in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, those are chambers of commerce working in association with unions, and they're required to do so by statute. So we don't have that infrastructure here. But the good news is that neither did England or Australia or France 20 years ago. And today, those countries are 10x where we are in terms of apprentices per capita outside the building trades, which is obviously where we want to get to. Yeah. So what did they do? They funded the establishment of this robust ecosystem of intermediaries. So in the UK today, there are like 1,200 apprenticeship service providers who are in the business of running around knocking on employer doors, asking them if they'd like help setting up and running an apprenticeship program. We don't have that here in the US. And the reason they have it and we don't is because they funded it.
Right.
So there's funding for those intermediaries. They get paid for every apprenticeship they create. They get paid for every apprentice they sign up and train. We don't have that here. What we do have is a Department of Labor that thinks they know better, doling out grants to organizations that are good at applying for Department of Labor grants and who don't employ a single apprentice. So I'm pretty harsh on them in the book and have continued to be harsh, but we need to move from this grant-based funding, which is at the discretion of folks at the Department of Labor, to formula-based, reliable formula-based funding, where anytime someone registers their apprenticeship program and hires an apprentice, it's paid for.
Yeah.
Today, you jump through the hoop of registering for your apprenticeship program, and it's a really high hoop. It's a pain in the butt to do it. There's no funding that comes from that. All that does is allows you to then go state by state, workforce board, and apply for funding for each apprentice you hire. And that funding, you're competing with other train and pray workforce development programs, which is silly. We shouldn't be in the same category as those programs that have poor outcomes. So that's what's not working, what needs to work. The good news is that from a policy standpoint, and this is in large part due to the good work of Apprenticeships for America, which is this new nonprofit that I helped create a couple years ago. They're lobbying at the federal and state level. They're helping to educate legislators and executives and interest groups. And we're moving in the right direction. We've got a couple of states now that are engaging in some nascent formula-based funding. The Department of Labor just put out a paper explaining explaining why they couldn't move to formula-based funding immediately, but how they might be able to launch a pilot about it. That was a report that Congress demanded that they provide to them. So we're heading in the right direction. But the fact of the matter is that today, for every dollar we spend on earn and learn pathways to work, we spend $1,000 on tuition-based pathways to work as taxpayer dollars. And for every dollar an apprentice receives of public funding, college students receiving $50. So I don't know whether the right ratio is 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 or 5-to-1, but it sure shouldn't be 50-to-1 or 1,000-to-1. And that's where we are today. So, and my view is that once we get the funding, once we fund it correctly, we'll see just how effective apprenticeships are and how effective that funding is at incentivizing the creation of apprenticeships. And then we'll be able to put more and more funding to work on apprenticeships. We have it all wrong today. We're funding it like we fund other workforce programs with discretionary grants. There's no reliable funding source. So you don't know. So we have this very immature ecosystem of intermediaries. It's not like the UK where it's basically an industry. It doesn't exist today. We need to build the industry, and that doesn't mean that it's all for profit. There are lots of nonprofits in the UK, in Australia, and France that do this work, and we'll do the work here. But there's no funding for them right now.
Yeah, of our foreign counterparts. So if we kind of got over our American exceptionalism, that we're somehow different than the rest of the world. What country, if you had workforce development or apprenticeship director from some state sitting in front of you right now, what country would you tell them to go look at? Like, there's the exemplar. That's the one you should look at.
Yeah, or today probably France or Australia. Both of them are good. They have the fund. I mean, the funding is like 100x per capita what we fund apprenticeship at. It's because they have the funding formula, right?
Yeah. So I have to imagine that in the higher ed world, you've got those that love you and your message and what you say, and then others that see you as a threat. So I know when I talk to educators about alternative pathways, the defense screens go up and warning, 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 we're under attack. And it really shouldn't be that way.
Well, it depends what you define as alternative. I mean, if an alternative pathway is a degree with a co-op program built in, I'm all in for that. I think that makes sense, and if you can do that and making it much more affordable for the student as well, and they graduate with less debt and work experience, I'm all in for that. But the reality is that today, if you look at students who matriculate into a post-secondary institution, and you add up the percentage who pay tuition, take on debt, and don't complete, with the percentage that then complete but graduate into underemployment, you're probably close to 70% of students experiencing what I would call a negative outcome initially. We know that if you're underemployed in your first job, you're likely underemployed 5 years, 10 years down the road. It's a big problem, and it explains why 20-somethings are. I think it explains why they voted for Trump. Quite frankly, in surprising numbers, because it's the current system, this college for all system with sort of a little bit of sprinkling of debt forgiveness on the back, was not working for the majority.
Yeah. Yeah. So so a college, I see a lot of small experiments happening in the collegiate space to do what you're describing, co-op programs, et cetera. How do you get them to see the opportunity to really scale up? And
I don't think they can scale themselves. I think that it's in the same way that, community colleges have not been leading the charge on being apprenticeship intermediaries. I think Title IV granting academic institutions are highly unlikely to have the capability themselves to develop the employer and employment interface that is needed for this problem. So I foresee the emergence of, as with apprenticeship, a new ecosystem, a new economy of intermediaries who are setting up and running these programs for the benefit of students, colleges, and employers. That's kind of what's needed here. So it's a new sector that I think 5 years from now will be pretty well ensconced. And it's the kind of intermediary that I think, unlike an OPM, hard to imagine it going away. Right? Much easier to think about a college or university bringing their online program development and operation in-house than the management of the co-op, which is going to require engagement with hundreds of large employers who are not going to want to interact with hundreds of individual colleges running co-ops. So you have a many to many problem that is going to require an intermediary standing between aggregating the supply of talent, seeking work experience, and skill development, and aggregating demand for that talent.
So scale happens through a well-established intermediary system.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So now let's go into K-12. You've got a superintendent of schools sitting in front of you right now. What's one low-risk, high-reward thing that they should be focusing on right now to set their school system up for success in this future state of viable alternative pathways?
Yeah, I've written a little bit about this. I think that the college for all uh, ethos has been met at the secondary level with essentially the demise of career and technical education, where there's really one pathway to success, to exit from high school, and that is a honors and AP courses that are accorded, that are graded on a 5.0 scale. And so, particularly in an era where standardized testing has become somewhat less important, GPA is relatively more important. GPA is your admission ticket to college. And why would you take a course that's graded on a 4.0 scale as opposed to a 5.0 scale? So the single most impactful lever would be to level the playing field in high school, and either bring those honors and AP courses down to a 4.0 scale, or establish a new set of CTE courses that are equivalent honors and AP courses. Interestingly, the College Board just launched the first AP courses that are arguably CTE in cybersecurity. So that's some progress there. But that we should have as many CTE courses on the same level as there are honors and traditional AP courses, and really give students the choice, and don't penalize them for choosing a pathway that may be more career oriented. So I think that's what I would say.
And for our listeners, CTE means
career and technical education.
Excellent. Thank
Basically,
you.
not academic courses that involve more project based work, more learning by doing. And frankly, I've also recently written about the work of Richard Reeves, who talks about the particular challenges that boys and young men are facing in our education system, and how they've fallen behind girls and young women at virtually every level of the system, to the point where you've got a number, I think 5 UC, University of California campuses, where the ratio is now 65-35. So that's a problem, and I think Richard would agree with the notion that more sort of project-based learning by doing at the middle and high school level would go a long way to helping to address that imbalance. I loved your article in Gap Letter about this topic. I feel very strongly that boys and young men are being left behind, and we just have to look back into history to know what happens when we have undereducated male population that feel left behind. Bad things are almost always the result of that. Agreed. Yep.
Ryan, I'm having a blast today, but we got to wrap things up. I just have 3 lightning round questions for you. Question number 1, if I asked you to define your purpose, why you're here, what would that be?
That's a great question. Look, I think if I can leave the legacy of helping higher education recognize that while it has many purposes and benefits, the primary benefit for the majority is employment and employability and economic outcomes. I think that if I would hope that over the last decade that my work has helped move the needle a little bit in the sector on that point, because it's not to say that there aren't other benefits, many benefits, civilizing benefits to higher education. But if we don't solve that problem, if we don't solve the sort of economic return on investment problem, everything else is going to be irrelevant. We need to, it's like, I think in A New You, I talk about it in the using the metaphor of triage in the ER, where we have lots going wrong, but you need to prioritize the most life-threatening issue first and treat that, and everything else can wait. And I feel like we're at a point of triage where we need to address that issue, and then the other good stuff that higher education does, like we can solve that as long as we can solve the sort of economic calculus.
Awesome. I'm going to give you a virtual high five because I agree with everything you just said. Next question. I give you a rudimentary time machine. You send a message to an earlier version of Ryan Craig. What's the message? What previous version of yourself do you send it to?
What previous version of myself? It's funny. In college, I wrote my senior essay in economics on comparing the American and Canadian university systems. I am from Canada originally, and in one sense, I did it. I did that to sort of convince myself that I'd made the right call in leaving my homeland and coming to the U.S. And talking about the sort of pros and cons of the U.S. System. And there are a lot of pros, but there are a lot of cons as well. Mostly inequality built into the system, and this was 30 years ago that I wrote that. So I think what I would say to myself is that keep going down that path, because the good is worth saving. So go after that, and I think I have.
That's awesome. Last question. We're all works in progress. What are you focused on right now in your personal journey of growth?
Patience. It's hard to say. Things in our sector take a long time to change, and I think that most people who work with me would say that I'm pretty impatient for the change that we hope is coming. So I'm sure that there on occasion I've been impatient, particularly when dealing with folks in Washington, D.C., where things maybe even move on a slower pace. Like if you think higher education moves slowly, go to Washington and deal with the Department of Labor. I'm trying to be more patient and play the long game. But every year that goes by here, we're losing hundreds of thousands of people in the current system. They're experiencing poor outcomes when they could be doing better if we'd make some of these changes.
Yeah. Ryan, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you today. I encourage our listeners to pick up your latest book, to subscribe to your newsletter. You can find Ryan Craig on LinkedIn. Is there anywhere else that you'd like to send folks to learn more about you?
Gapletter.com is the newsletter. So
okay.
If you're not already receiving it, just sign up.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your contributions to the show today.
Thanks, Andrew. Real pleasure.
All right.
Enjoyed it. Thanks.
Cool. My name is Andy Temte. This is the Balancing Act podcast. You can find us on all the major streaming services as well as out on YouTube. Please like, subscribe, rate, and most importantly, share this really impactful conversation with your colleagues. The show was produced by Nicholas Temte, and we'll see you next time on the Balancing Act.